Hi everyone, I am Mike Hay representing Open Analytics today to bring you the credit score showdown between machine learning and logistic regression. Let the battle begin. So today we're going to go through a practical comparison between logistic regression and gradient boosted trees. The information I want to give you today is something hopefully you can use to make a decision about what you'll use in which of these methods you'll use in your own credit risk modeling project. To compare the modeling techniques, we will consider ease of construction, model transparency, and model performance. To look at ease of construction, we will go through different aspects of constructing each of these model types and compare the effort required. For model transparency, we will look at the common diagnostics techniques for each model type and see what information we can get out of each model. And for model performance, we'll use the Gini coefficient in an out-of-time sample. This slide is to give you an overview of the entire model build project. Typically, you start with the data preparation. That usually takes the most time in your model build project. After that, you have your feature engineering. That's to get the maximum predictive power out of your data inputs. And then it's the optimization model. That's what we're talking about today. There are a lot of models you could choose from, but probably logistic regression and gradient boosting are the ones most commonly used. So that's what we'll focus on today. This slide gives you a picture of the kind of gains you can expect from each phase in the model build project. Now, this is Gini's you can expect in a large bank model with a long history of excellent data, including transaction data and financials. You can boost the Gini right up to 80s or 90s even. I don't want to spoil anything, but we're not going to achieve Ginis that high today. However, I still wanted to show this chart because it gives you a good idea about the different proportions of gains you get from each part. Start off with, on the left there, that's your data preparation part. If you get that right, you're more than halfway there. So that's really important. After that, your feature engineering and your interactions. Getting the most out of that data, that adds pretty much everything you're going to get. You can apply any traditional statistical modeling technique once your features have been engineered, and you can get a really good model out of that. We're looking at the difference between that and a machine learning model today. Maybe you're going to get an extra uplift of about 5%. That's about the most you typically see. What will we get today? I don't know. Stay tuned to find out. The data sources that you often see in a credit risk modeling project come in various forms. They're all predictive. So today we'll have application form data. Bureau data, you can supplement your own data with the credit bureaus. We have Open Analytics has a good relationship with Creditor Watch. We're going to use some of their data today. We don't have financials or transactional data in there, so that will decrease the Gini somewhat. We do, however, have geographic data. We use our geographic risk index, which uses ABS data to rank the 330 SA3 regions in Australia in terms of risk. The model setup for today, the data we're going to use is Open Analytics non-bank asset finance data used for the credit portfolio manager tool. This is a mixture of asset finance lenders in the data pool using, they're all using our hosted credit provisioning service. They're primarily broker originated low doc lending, so there's no financial assessment in them. Our training data goes for almost 4 years from the start of 2020 to the end of 2023. And the out of time sample will go for 7 months in 2024. Notice we're going to have a 12-month forward-looking target, which means we have to take off 12 months from the end of the data. So this is recent data. It was created in July this year. The model design, our definition of default is a 90 days plus arrears trigger, and it goes over a 12-month forward-looking default window. Very typical of behavioral scorecards. Our model performance, as mentioned, is going to be done using the Gini coefficient. The machine learning model, we're going to use light GBM for that. That's a gradient boosted trees model, and it's developed by Microsoft. It's really similar to XGBoost, came out a couple of years after XGBoost. And the logistic regression will be run in the GLM function in R, which everyone can access. It's supported for us by some proprietary software we'd use for binning and diagnostics as well. Now, I said I'll compare these models on 3 fronts: the ease of construction, model transparency, and model performance. We're into the ease of construction phase now. So we're going to talk about what's required to build these models and see how much effort is involved. First off, logistic regression. The part that requires the most effort for this, after you've finished your data prep and feature selection, you go into the binning. That's the part that takes effort here. But the binning is also a major strength of logistic regression. It provides flexibility and control. And there are plenty of algorithms that will automatically generate binning for you, which is convenient. However, usually those automatic binnings you get will have some kind of issues that are not satisfactory from some stakeholders' perspective, and usually you'll have to rebin to make sure you satisfy everyone. That's fine though. The model has total freedom over the binning in logistic regression, and you can choose a way to bin everything that gets the best compromise between the competing objectives of performance, explainability, and stakeholder interests. As an example of that, let's consider a really common variable that you might use in your credit risk model. This is age of business. You run that through your automatic binning algorithm, and it might produce something like this. It's a good binning. It has good differentiation of risk. You get a univariate Gini of 12.6% just on this one variable. However, it has some obvious issues there. The main one being that there are reversals in the trend, which can be difficult to explain. So for example, if you have a business that's 4 to 5 years old, it looks like it's slightly higher risk than 3 to 4 years old. That's hard to explain. You know, you don't want to go to a business and say, look, we can give you this limit increase if you wait until you're 5 to 6 years old, but don't wait till you're 6 to 7 years old, then you're higher risk again. It just doesn't cut it. But you can rebin that however you want. Just you have manual control over it. You can group things up into something that makes perfect sense, like the one we have at the bottom. That will decrease your Gini slightly, so it decreases the Gini from 12.6 to 12.1%. It's up to you to decide what's acceptable there. Now the trend is explainable. You say new businesses less than 2 years old usually have enough capital to get that far, even if the business isn't running well, so they're typically low risk. If the business isn't going well, then the high risk part, the highest risk age is 2 to 8 years. That's when they're probably going to fail after they've run out of money. After that, as the business becomes more established, the risk decreases. There is this bin at the end in this case, so businesses that are 19 years and older have increased risk. It's up to you whether you accept that. So you might say, look, if a business has been around for 20 years and they're asking for a loan, they're probably going through a restructure or something like that, which comes with added risk. So maybe that's acceptable. If it's not acceptable, it's fine. You have control over that. You can put in an overlay, or you can even, in the GLM function, you can put in an offset and set the score in that bin to whatever you like. So talking about ease of construction, yes, there is a bit of effort in the binning here, but you have total control. The amount of time it takes depends on the experience of the modeler. So if you have someone who already knows the typical stakeholder interests and is familiar with the data, it's faster than if you have someone who's new to it. Onto machine learning. So this machine learning is completely different, really. So for gradient boosting methods such as LightGBM or XGBoost, you have great functions that are easy to use. There's no binning required. So long as the data is in the right form, these algorithms can handle pretty much anything you're going to throw at them, and they'll give you a good result, which sounds really convenient. However, you have to take a lot of care to avoid overfitting the model. It's really easy to do, and if you do that, you're not going to get the performance you expect when you put it into production. The level of overfitting can be controlled using these optional hyperparameters. As they're optional, so the model has the option to skip doing that. However, yeah, if you do, GBM is going to use its default values. If you read online, people say they're really good. We'll see how they perform later on. We'll do the hyperparameter search today. Hyperparameters are configuration settings that control the way the algorithm is run. There are a lot of them. There are pages and pages of these. If you look at the documentation, today we're going to aim to control the maximum complexity of the models that the algorithm creates, and that's going to reduce overfitting. As I said, there are many hyperparameters. When I vary them independently in this modeling project, I found that these two had the biggest impact on their own. So we'll look at these today. Num leaves is the maximum number of leaves in any one tree in the model. It actually has a lot of trees that it puts together, maximum number in one of those. Max bins is another hyperparameter that has a big impact, and that's the maximum number of bins that any one predictor is segmented into. To do our hyperparameter search, we're going to use cross-validation in the training sample only. Okay, cross-validation is a good tool that gives you an idea about how things are going to perform outside the training sample, in the out-of-time sample, but only using the training data. There are some really efficient methods to tune hyperparameters. They do a smarter search than we're going to use today. Today we're just going to use grid search. It's good for demonstration purposes. It just uses brute force and runs through the entire hyperparameter space. So using grid search, we start off with a wide coarse grid to test a lot of different parameter values. And once you've done that, you can find more promising areas in your hyperparameter space and hone in on those zones and search there as well. The chart I have here uses it's cross-validation, so it has a train and test Gini, even though we're only using the training sample here. It shows a really typical result. We're just looking at the num leaves dimension at the moment. We're averaging across the max bin dimension. The complexity of the models is increased as we move to the right in the num leaves x-axis. If you look at the train Gini in the cross-validation, that will increase. That will just go right up to near 100% as you increase the complexity. But that is classic overfitting. You can't trust those numbers. Look at the test Gini, that's the more important one, the light blue line. And what typically happens there is your performance will increase for a while up to some optimum, and then it'll start to decrease as you increase complexity. That's when the overfitting sets in. So here we see the optimum looks like it's happening quite early in our grid search at num leaves equals 9. That's the highest test Gini score. It's pretty tricky to do a good hyperparameter search though. You have to look at it a few different ways. I like this way. What we've done here, we've changed the dimensions. So now on the x-axis, we've put in the Gini, so it's the model performance on the x-axis. And against that, we plot the parameter value. Notice there's a big cloud of points there. There are actually 1,440 points in this grid search. And through those, we put a moving average so we can get an idea about the trend, how the parameter values change as we increase in model performance. Here, the good models are over on the right. The less performant models are over on the left. And it looks like the num leaves is decreasing across there, which means that the more complex models aren't doing as well as the less complex models. However, the trend is not monotonic. There's a dip in the middle there. I'll talk about that. For now, though, let's go right over to the right-hand side of the chart. That's where the best performing models are. If you look, you can see that the cloud really narrows down to just two values there. That's num leaves equals 9 and 15 on the y-axis. They're all, the top 5% of models here are just from those two parameter values, which really gives you a good indication of where you should refine your hyperparameter search. So the model complexity increases if you move to the left now to worse models. The dip occurs because the least complex parameter we have there with num leaves just equals to 3. They're all about the mid-range of the performing models, mid-range genies there. And after that, you go back to the lowest genies. That's where you have the highest complexity models. Okay, so I guess the point on all this, we're still comparing ease of construction. If you're going to do the hyperparameter search, and you should, on an ML model, it is quite involved. It takes a lot of effort. But once you've got these hyperparameters set, you're happy with them. Here we found these values. It doesn't really matter what they are for the context of this talk, but we've got our optimal hyperparameters. Put those in, you train the model, and you move on. The next thing we want to consider is model transparency, and we'll deal with logistic regression first. With the logistic regression, the relationship between the predictors and the outcomes is perfectly clear. Everything's understood. So here we have an example of our geo-risk index that is split up into bins. The lower numbers are more risky regions, the higher numbers are less risky regions. So we would split that up into bins. As expected, we get a decreasing trend in the default rate as we go to the better regions. And there's a low population region that we separated as well. You can look at the corresponding scores, and as you get to the better regions, you get a better score. Everything makes sense. If you go through all of the predictors like that and you're happy with everything, then you can be certain that any outcome you get is explainable and intuitive, and no problem's going to arise at all. You understand everything. If you find that your scores don't align with your default rates, which can happen, then you just go back to your binning phase again and do another iteration, and you can make sure everything's intuitive here. That's on the model level, so broader level. If you go to an individual account, you can also explain everything that's going on. Open Analytics has a good tool, the attribution tool, which tells you what contribution each predictor is making to an outcome. So here, if you look at the final credit score is a little bit below average there. So we've ranked everything into deciles. That one's a bit below average. You can see from the predictors which ones bring it down. You see, even though industry there is a pretty low risk industry, is being brought down by net turnover and spend variables. So that's why it's getting a below average score. So customers can use this to describe what's happening to their customers. You don't have to give them all of the information coming out. It's all available, but you can select what information you give them. So with logistic regression, it's perfectly transparent. Machine learning, on the other hand, so you use Shapley analysis to explain machine learning models. Here's an example of it, similar to what I was just showing for logistic regression on the model trend. So we're using the same variable, geographic index here, and you can see that as you go from less risky regions, more risky regions on the left, as you move to less risky regions, yes, the resulting probability of default, the SHAP value here decreases as expected, but the trend is harder to explain. Like there are, non-monotonic parts where it bounces around a little bit, and even for one given value of the predicted geographic index, there's a spread of values you might get from your GBM model, from your machine learning model. So for example, if you go to geographic index of 50, there's a spread there of different values you can get. That spread is about half a risk grade. It's fairly significant. Shapley analysis, when you make these partial dependence plots, they'll put in the variable that explains most of this difference, in this case arrears rating. So you can see that from the color of the points. Even though that's helping, it's still hard to explain. If you look at the best regions near 75 and above, all the yellow parts, the worst arrears ratings, are actually in the better risk bar. They're at the bottom. But for the rest of the geographic index values, those yellow dots tend to be at the top. So why is that happening? You don't know that. It's really hard to explain. However, on an individual account level, you can get a perfect explanation. That's fine. Shapley analysis will give you exactly the contribution each predictor has to the final outcome. So similar to the attribution tool. Just the problem is you don't really know why they're having this effect. And you could change the variables only slightly and get quite a different outcome. And that's just, it's not very well explained. That's the end of the transparency section. We come now to the model performance section, the moment we've all been waiting for. How did they go? So I'm going to give it to machine learning, 56% to 52% Gini in the out of time sample. So a 4-point difference. If you look at the table there, if you just take the average out of time Gini, so the machine learning model actually gets 57%. It looks like a 5% difference. However, there's a problem here. If you look at the chart, that Gini is decreasing over time. When that happens, it suggests overfitting has still occurred, even though we're really careful and we did our cross-validation hyperparameter search, we're still getting overfitting. That's why the Gini is decreasing out of time. Should say as well, this is a 12-month forward-looking target. So the last month in the training data is December 2023. That's still going to be quite correlated with these months here. We're going out 7 months, so it's still impacting everything here. So overfitting can occur, and maybe these Ginis we're seeing as they're decreasing are not going to be representative of the Ginis you'll get in future. It's hard to know. Logistic regression, on the other hand, sure, the performance is a little bit lower. However, it's stable. It's actually increased a little bit there, just due to statistical fluctuations. And it's hard to overfit a logistic regression model when you're using the kind of, the amount of data we have for the average credit risk models. So usually that's going to be fine, and you can expect that to be nice and flat. I said earlier that you don't need to do the hyperparameter search that we did. You can just use LightGBM out of the box and let it choose its own hyperparameters. Let's look at that. Out of the box, the out of time average is great. Look at that, 58.7. It looks really strong. However, that red line there, that is decreasing even faster than the other one. So I think that's definitely overfit. It has a decrease of almost 7% just over our 7 months in the out of time sample, which means we're losing 1 Gini point per month. And when we go into production, you would expect that to keep on decreasing there. So that's a worry. I would say you need to refit that with selected hyperparameters. Okay, that brings us to the roundup. How did it do in all our sections? So ease of construction, I'm going to give that a tie. It's hard to say. It depends on what effort you want to put into each model. If you want to, if you want to take a lot of time in the binning for logistic regression, it can take up a fair bit of time. If you want to do a really good hyperparameter search on machine learning, that can take up time, but you can use automated algorithms for both of them and reduce the time. It's up to you. Model transparency, that 100% hands down goes to logistic regression. You understand everything about the logistic regression model, and it's just more difficult with machine learning model due to the complexity of the model. You just can't really explain that. Model performance does favor the Gini. However, we had those problems with it looking like it was overfit in the out of time sample. That's something you have to be really careful about. And I would say in the end of the day, if you want a model that's explainable and stable, you have a lot of control over it, use logistic regression. If you want a model that just squeezes the most performance you can get out of your data, then you can try a machine learning model, but you should be really careful with it. Okay, thanks very much for listening.